In this video, we're going to look at backing up our Exchange 2013 server using Windows Server Backup. The first thing I want to show you is the storage that I've configured on this server. You might recall that when this server was first built, there was an extra 100 gigabyte volume that was mounted on the server that I didn't do anything with at the time. So I have my system volume, my database volume, and my log volume, and then this extra 100 gig one sitting here that's available. And what I'm actually going to use that for is to store my backups. Now 100 gigabytes is enough in my case. It will fit at least one backup of the system drive and the databases on there. The larger you're able to make that drive, the more copies or backup copies of your server it will be able to store. But even if you've only got enough space to store one backup or the most recent backup, that should still be fine for the backup and recovery sort of testing scenarios and learning how to use Windows Server Backup and how to use Exchange features such as recovery databases. A Windows Server Backup is a component of the Windows Server operating system, but it's not installed by default. So we can jump into a PowerShell window and run install Windows feature, and the feature we want to install is Windows Server Backup. So there we go, that doesn't take very long to install. There's no restart required. And you can find Windows Server Backup here in the administrative tools, or from the start screen, just start typing Windows Server Backup. There we go. Alright, so launch Windows Server Backup, launch the application. And let's take a look at configuring a backup for our Exchange server. Now, of course, no backup has been configured for this computer. It's the first time that Windows Server Backup has been installed and run. So over here we have a few choices. We can set up a backup schedule, or we can backup, just do a one-time backup. And we can also do a recovery. So let's set up a backup schedule. We get this backup schedule wizard. For our purposes, a full server is good. We can do a full server backup. If you don't have enough space to store your backups, you could consider just doing a custom backup where you only choose the volumes where Exchange databases and logs are stored. But if you want full recovery capabilities for this server, why not choose a full server backup? We can schedule this backup to happen once per day. 9 PM is as good as any other time. If your lab's going to be running all the time, you can really schedule this backup to run at any time of day you like. I'm going to leave mine running at 9 PM. And in my case, I'm going to back up to a hard disk that is dedicated for backups, and that will be that 100 gigabyte volume. As you can see here, my G drive. And that's going to be dedicated purely for backups. So all I need to do is just choose it here from the list. And Windows Server Backup is going to automatically exclude that volume. Since it's the backup destination, it's going to exclude it from the backup job itself. And there we go. Now you just want to make sure at this point that a VSS full backup is what's being performed, because that's the backup type that is required for your Exchange server application. So you click finish. You can see it's going to format my backup disk for me. And if we look back here in Windows Explorer, it's now hidden that drive as well. We can no longer see it here in Windows Explorer because it's now being dedicated to Windows Server Backup as a backup destination. So we don't have to worry about it now. Close that off. So we've got our next scheduled backup, which is going to happen on this time and date, which happens to be tomorrow in my case. but I'd like to run a backup right now. So I can actually click on this backup once option here, and we can choose to run a backup using the schedule backup options, so using those options that we already chose, or we can do a custom backup selection just for this one-time job. So I'm just going to let it use the schedule backup options. You can see there all our different volumes, the system state, etc. And it being a VSS full backup is all selected for us because that's what the schedule backup is configured to do. And as soon as we click backup, that's going to launch. Now you may or may not have heard that backing up Exchange Server or backing up your Exchange Server databases is how you get the transaction logs on the server to truncate. So you'll be able to see that happen when you run this first backup. If you've been using the script to generate some email within your test lab environment, like I have, then you've probably got some transaction logs sitting on the log volume. Now I've only got, looks like about 2 gigabytes worth of transaction logs, but we should expect that to drop down to basically almost entirely free space when the backup is completed and those transaction logs are truncated. So I'll click backup now. And now we just need to wait for that backup to complete. You can actually close this wizard and just wait for the results to appear over here in the Windows Server Backup console. But I'm going to leave this open and come back when it's completed. And that backup job has now completed, so I can close the wizard. Just refreshing this view down here, we can see that my roughly 100 gigabytes of backup drive capacity has now used about 40 gigabytes of space. And that backup has completed. We can close the backup dialog. We see our backup result of successful, last backup result successful. And we've got 1 copy stored on that drive. Like I said, if you had a larger backup volume, you'd be able to store more copies of your server on that volume, but only 1 copy or the most recent backup is all you really need for these sort of testing and training scenarios. Now, one other way we can check that that backup has run is using the Exchange Management Shell. And we just run get mailbox database with the status parameter, and we'll just grab the name and the last full backup for each database. So there it is again, DB1, DB2, my archive database, each with that backup timestamp for the most recent backup. So now that we have a backup of the data to work with, we can start looking at some different recovery scenarios for our mailbox databases and the mailboxes and items within them.